Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 15th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Much invite you to be seated. You're already noticing, if you haven't already, that it's a really long reading and it's really small print. Alright? So, we want to put it in there for you. We had to shrink it down. So I want to invite you, if you don't want to, don't follow along. Just listen. Hear these stories that Jesus tells. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. "Which one among you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it upon his shoulders and he rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep.' Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and her neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the wealth that will belong to me.' So the father divided his assets between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took over the place throughout the region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that region, who sent him to the fields to feed his pigs. He would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and enough to spare? But here I am, dying of hunger. I will get up, and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion, and he ran to him, put his arms around him, and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now the elder son was in the field, and as he came and approached the house, he heard the music and the dancing. And he called one of the slaves, and he asked what was going on. And he replied, 'Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has gotten him back safe and sound.' Then the older son became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, he who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost, and he is now found. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
So we live in a world where often I look out and I see and I notice that there are people who are put into categories in different places and segments of society. We have the insiders and the outsiders, the winners and the losers, those who some deem as worthy, and then those who are deemed as unworthy. We have those who are labeled as successful and those who are labeled as failures. And I've noticed, and I struggle with this idea where we are so quick to exclude and say to someone or some group of people that you don't belong, or you're not good enough, or you have made too many mistakes. When we open our eyes and our hearts, we can see this happening around our nation, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our social circles, and yes, even the church isn't immune from this type of behavior. One of my biggest struggles of faith, and as a pastor, is when I see people from churches, and churches themselves, use the gospel of Jesus to exclude people and groups of people. Misusing and misunderstanding the Bible is nothing new. There are many ways that people overlook what we see as a radical love and acceptance of Jesus to twist their ideas for their own purpose. There are churches and people who turn grace into a gatekeeping tool. That you must believe exactly as we believe, and you must get your life together first before you become worthy of God's love and injustice. Or they may highlight sins such as alcohol abuse or divorce or doubt and say how horrible these are, but then ignore such things as gossip or coveting or pride and arrogance or materialism. There are those in church circles and churches that use faith as a tool of fear. I have seen this a lot, and this bothers me. Such as, if you don't do X, Y, Z, well then God will send you to hell. Let's be honest, throughout the centuries, the Bible has been misused to justify exclusion time and time again. The Bible was used to justify slavery. The Bible was used to justify segregation and racism. The Bible was used, and it continues to be used, to exclude women from roles of leadership in church and society. The Bible has been misused to mistreat the poor, the vulnerable, the immigrant, the disabled, as the people have been taught that wealth and health are signs of God's favor. There are like half a dozen sermons where we can explore all these avenues. But my point today in sharing this is to say that we are Jesus' people. And to truly be Jesus' people, we are to be his hands and feet in the world. And Jesus, time and time again, shows us radical love and inclusion of those who the world wants to distance or set aside. So to be Jesus' people, we must pause and question when we hear people of faith trying to justify the exclusion of someone that they deem to be the other. Take Jesus' response today to the Pharisees. It starts off with Jesus being criticized for spending time with tax collectors and sinners. Of course, it's the sinners who the Pharisees, those in high and mighty seats, have labeled, well, those are the sinners. Of course, it's not us, right? The Pharisees are literally in shock. Like, here's a rabbi, someone who claims to be a person of God, a teacher, let alone someone who people are claiming is the Messiah, hanging out with the riffraff and the hooligans. You shouldn't be seen with them, Jesus. How can we take you seriously? Is what we can hear them saying. And Jesus responds to their grumbling. I love that in the text it says they were grumbling with 3 stories and 3 parables that all sum up Jesus' radical love and inclusion. The first one, the lost sheep, where the shepherd leaves the 99 behind to find the one who was lost and in danger. The one of the lost coin, where a woman loses her coin coin and searches the entire house until she finds it. And then the lost son, who takes his father's money before it was his time, loses it all, returns home with nothing, who is welcomed back with radical grace and open arms. Each of these stories tells a different aspect of Jesus' radical love and God's radical love and welcome. And I love how they all end with a party. But first, to hear the story in the correct way, we must identify with those who heard it first. They were disgusted that Jesus was eating and associating with those the world has shunned. Who would that be for us? And I think that's different for each one of us. Who is it that might we see Jesus eating and socializing with that would get us to be like, oh, Jesus, why? Is it the poor and the homeless? The immigrant or the refugee? The incarcerated or the formerly incarcerated? People with disabilities or mental illness? Racial or ethnic minorities? Anyone based on their gender or age? Those in the LGBT community? Or maybe those who don't attend church or outsiders or unbelievers? Those are all groups the church has tried to distance in different places and different times. Who is it for you that would make your stomach turn to say, Jesus, how can you be associated with them? And then hear Jesus' response. The first story of the lost sheep. It seems irrational, doesn't it? That a shepherd who's in charge of caring for the entire flock would risk leaving 99 in the wilderness to go find the one. Many would even say that the one doesn't even matter at the expense of the vulnerability of the 99. Some might even say that to sacrifice the one so that the 99 can continue to live in comfort is better. But Jesus' radical love is personal. It is that the one who is in danger is lost. The 99 are comfortable, they're safe, so the shepherd goes to bring back the one who is at risk. And this reminds us at times that Jesus calls us to abandon our comfort zones for the sake of the one who is in trouble. In this parable, Jesus tells us that the one who is at risk matters. And we should go, and Jesus goes, to search out and bring home the one who is in trouble. Then Jesus tells the parable about a coin. Similar, reinforcing the point of the lost being found, but from a different perspective. In this, the woman loses 1 coin out of 10. She spends all day looking for it. And I wonder how long it would take for one of us to give up. Say, it's not worth all the time and energy to spend to find this 1 coin. It's not worth it. That coin is worthless. My time is worth far more than that coin is. But then I love this twist and this ending. When she finds the coin after searching all day, she throws a party. And I can't help but think that party that she throws to invite all her friends and neighbors to costs far more than that coin was worth. Jesus, in this parable, I hear declaring what others might declare as worthless and not worth our time, Jesus saying it has value to not give up on. And now the son, the most detailed of the story. I can hear the Pharisees say, well, the sheep and the coin, well, they did nothing to create their own situation. But these people who make their own beds, they have to sleep in it, right? We get the story of a son and abundance of grace. A son who has lost everything, who created his own situation, who there was a famine in the land, and even outside forces had made him live in poverty, comes and returns home to a father welcoming him with open arms and grace, and yet another party. But then we see the older son, who gets jealous and shouts, "It's not fair." And often I hear from the church and in church circles, when we see acts of grace, we hear people say, well, it's not fair. And we find ourselves like the older son. But the older son is reminded, once again, that everything I've had has always been yours. And we must welcome your younger brother back as he has returned. We must offer that grace and that forgiveness, because the love of Jesus is inclusive. I want to share a story about a friend of mine named John. John was a gentleman who I first met when he started attending worship with us. But John attended worship for the first time when we worshiped outside over the summer. And I noticed him, we were worshiping outside on the front lawn, he would ride his bike, and he would stop and join us for worship, but then he'd always leave early, every time. So I never got to talk to him. Eventually I did. And I learned John's story as part of a group that often people like to keep at a distance, in that he was currently incarcerated. John was in the work release program finishing up his prison sentence in a local jail. But in the work release program, he was released to go to work, and then he was released for a little bit of time on Sundays. And then eventually, John was able to bring a piece of paper to church, and I was assigned it so he could stay for the whole worship service. But then an instance happened in the jail where John was defending somebody else, and they said, you know what, John, you've lost all your privileges, and you're going to go back to prison and finish out your sentence there. So when John was finishing out the last year plus of his prison sentence, he was writing letters to me, sometimes 2-3 times a week. And he would draw pictures. He would draw pictures and send them to me. And my whole office wall during those years was full of his drawings. And I always said to myself that if I ever found something that I was drawn to, that I would get a tattoo. Right? And there was one picture that he sent that I was like, that'd make a cool tattoo. And I got it. People have asked me on my forearm what this tattoo's meaning is. So I want to share it with you today. On why I ended up saying, you know what, I want to get this tattoo. Regardless of what your thoughts are. You know, I know some people ran into someone and said, you're allowed to be a pastor and have a tattoo? I said, well, I'm right before you, yes. But my new neighbor said, you know, you must be a cool pastor. I said, how come you didn't know me? You know, but it has meaning for me. For me, this reminds me that God is a God of second chances. That it's not the worst thing somebody does that should be held against them or define them. You see, for John, he wasn't violent, he didn't do anything, he made a mistake. A mistake that any one of us could have made because he was desperate and he had nothing. He was part of that group we like to avoid and stay away from, the poor and the destitute. And when he was at his worst, he was asked to go buy some medication that he knew someone was going to use to make methamphetamine. And when he was told, as he was raised, to be honest, they charged him with a felony, 25 years for distribution and manufacturing. Even though he had nothing to do other than just buying medication, to try to get money to survive. And he admits he made a mistake. But even our worst mistakes shouldn't be something that God or any of us hold against someone. So when I saw that, I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get that tattoo. And then when I showed it to John, his first thought was, he laughed. And he's like, you know, I almost got in trouble for sending you all those pictures because the COs thought that I was making tattoos for other inmates. And I told them, no, I was sending them to my pastor. And they let it go. To me, it's that reminder that everyone is worth something in God's eyes. That even mistakes we make, God doesn't hold against us, so we shouldn't hold it against others. It's a reminder of grace, and acceptance, and love. And that's what I think these 3 parables remind us of. Jesus' love and acceptance. So, we're Jesus' people. Let's share that love, that inclusion, that welcome with others. And let's not hold mistakes or situations against them, because Jesus did.